Mewtwo is, without a doubt, one of the darkest and most complex characters in the Pokémon universe. His origin is told in the film Pokémon the movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back. He was not born naturally, but rather as the result of a scientific experiment. Humans took the DNA of the mythical Pokémon Mew, and from that created an artificial clone, more powerful, more controlled in theory. When Mewtwo awakens for the first time, he is in a laboratory. He is still confused, trying to understand who he is, why he exists, and why he is there. The scientists, instead of treating him with empathy or respect, see him as a living weapon. They monitor him, study his psychic power, and treat him like a guinea pig. Mewtwo begins to question the world around him, his identity, and realizes that he was created solely to serve human interests. This realization leads Mewtwo to a state of rage and frustration. When he discovers that he is just an experiment, an artificial copy made with no purpose other than control, he collapses. Using his powers, Mewtwo destroys the entire laboratory and kills the scientists who created him. That's right. Unlike the light-hearted tone of most Pokémon episodes, here the death is real and explicit. It is a moment that marks the franchise for its emotional and philosophical charge. From there, Mewtwo begins his journey of revenge. He believes that humans are cruel, selfish, and that no Pokémon should serve them. His worldview is distorted by the pain and trauma of his creation. He tries to prove that he is superior, that he is not just a copy, but someone with free will and absolute power. Mewtwo's origin is not only dark because of what happens, but also because of what it represents. It is a direct criticism of human arrogance, unethical science, and the concept of identity. Mewtwo is a being who never asked to be born, but who is thrown into the world full of doubts, anger, and loneliness. And that's why, to this day, his story is one of the most tragic and profound in the entire Pokémon franchise. The death of Marowak in Lavender Town is one of the saddest and darkest moments in the Pokémon anime, especially since it is a real and direct loss shown in a series aimed at children. In the episode The Tower of Terror, or more specifically in the story that takes place in Lavender Town, Ash and his friends visit the Pokémon Tower, a place where trainers go to say goodbye to their deceased Pokémon. There, they discover something disturbing, the spirit of a Marowak that was killed trying to protect her offspring, Little Cobone from Team Rocket. The members of Team Rocket were hunting rare and valuable Pokémon, and Marowak refused to let them capture Cobone. She faced the villains alone, and ended up being killed by them. After her death, her spirit began to haunt the tower, unable to rest in peace because she was worried about her son's safety. The most striking thing is that the anime deals with this event directly. It shows that Marowak died, that her spirit is still present, and that Cobone lives in constant sadness and mourning for having lost her mother. It is a clear representation of loss, pain, and mourning, something rare in children's series. This episode helped to build the dark and mysterious atmosphere of Lavender Town, which to this day is remembered by fans as one of the scariest and most emotionally charged places in the Pokémon universe. The story of Marowak and Cobone is a powerful reminder that behind the battles and adventures, there are deep bonds between humans and Pokémon, and that these bonds are also subject to the pain of separation. Stoutland's death in the Pokémon Sun and Moon anime is without a doubt one of the most emotional and painful moments in the entire franchise. The episode revolves around Litten, a small fire Pokémon who lives on the streets of Alola. He is an orphan and was taken in by an old Stoutland who becomes a father figure to him. From the beginning, the anime shows Stoutland as an elderly Pokémon, frail and already having difficulty moving. Despite this, he takes care of Litten with affection, teaching him to be strong, to hunt for food, and even to train. The relationship between the two is built with subtlety and a lot of feeling, almost like a grandfather taking care of a grandson. Over time, Stoutland's health deteriorates. Litten, even realizing this, denies reality. He continues to try to play, bring food, and seek help, but nothing works. At a certain point, Stoutland simply disappears. Litten searches desperately for him, Until in one of the most silent and impactful scenes of the anime, he realizes that his friend is gone. The anime never explicitly shows Stoutland's body. Everything is done with a rare delicacy. The absence, the emptiness, and the sadness in Litton's eyes speak more than any dialogue. He spends days mourning, isolated, refusing food and avoiding contact with others. This loss is treated with respect and sensitivity, showing that mourning is part of life, even in the world of Pokémon. Litton eventually finds the strength to move on, but carries the memory of Stoutland with him. It is a story about love, loss, and growing up, and one that proves that the Pokémon anime, even though it is aimed at children, is capable of touching universal themes with depth and real emotion. In the film Pokémon Mewtwo Strikes Back, one of the most striking and dark moments occurs when Ash Ketchum sacrifices himself during the battle between Mewtwo and Mew. The scene takes place at the climax of the film, when the two most powerful Pokémon in the world are fighting with all their might, and their clones are waging brutal battles against the originals. It is a senseless war, full of pain, anger, and confusion. Ash, seeing that the situation has gotten out of control, runs to the center of the battle trying to stop Mew and Mewtwo from continuing to destroy each other. In the middle of the explosion of energy between the two, he is hit and ends up being completely petrified. His body turns to stone there, in front of everyone, as if he were dead. The impact of the scene is enormous. Pikachu tries to wake him up, uses his electric attacks several times, but nothing happens. Desperate, he starts to cry, and not only him, all the Pokémon there, original and clones, cry too. These tears, driven by pain and compassion, end up reversing Ash's petrification, who returns to life. This sequence is loaded with emotion and symbolism. The idea of someone sacrificing themselves for peace, dying in the middle of a war, and being brought back by the tears of the innocent has an almost biblical weight. It is like a metaphor for redemption, empathy, and the ability to change even the most hardened hearts, like Mewtwo's. After witnessing Ash's love and sacrifice, Mewtwo realizes that true strength lies not in cloning or battle, but in the connection between living beings. He then decides to leave with the clones to start over somewhere else, far from the cruelty of humans. This scene marked an entire generation of fans, not only because Ash almost died, but because it showed that Pokémon can also talk about deep themes like sacrifice, empathy, and the transformative power of emotions. Meowth's story is one of the saddest and most human in the entire Pokémon universe, and it's surprising how emotionally charged it is. Before joining Team Rocket, Meowth lived alone on the streets, starving and ignored by everyone. One day, he falls in love with a female Meowth named Meowsy, who lived with a rich family. Meowsy cruelly rejects him, saying that he was poor and savage, and that she would never be interested in someone like him. Devastated by this rejection, Meowth decides that he needs to become acceptable to her. That's when he begins to learn, on his own, to speak like a human and even to walk on two legs, a completely unnatural feat for a Pokémon. He goes through an intense, painful, and lonely process, forcing himself to abandon everything that made him an ordinary Meowth, in the hope of being loved. But when he finally succeeds and returns to see Meowsy again, she rejects him again, this time saying that he is acting strangely, that he no longer seems like a real Pokémon. In other words, he has shed his identity to please her, but in the end, he has lost both his chance to be accepted and his very essence. This story is full of symbolism. Meowth represents the desire to be accepted at any cost, even if it means changing who you are. The final rejection is a bitter lesson in how love, when not reciprocated, can lead to self-abandonment. It is one of the most human, tragic, and unexpectedly profound moments in the anime. A Pokémon trying to be human in order to be loved, and ending up alone. Meizo's story in Pokémon Black and White is one of the densest and darkest ever presented in the anime. Unlike many villains in the franchise, Main is not evil by nature. He is a victim. Since he was a child, Nen was isolated from the world by Getsis, the true leader of Team Plasma. He grew up in a controlled environment, surrounded only by Pokémon that were injured and mistreated by humans, which caused him to develop a distorted view of reality. He believed that humans only caused Pokémon suffering, and that the only solution was to free them. Ghetsis manipulated men from an early age so that he would become the king of Team Plasma, someone charismatic, with a seemingly noble mission, but who in reality was just a piece in Ghetsis' own plan for domination. While preaching the liberation of Pokémon, Ghetsis only wanted to be the only one with power over them. Imp's childhood was marked by complete isolation, indoctrination, and psychological abuse. He had no contact with other humans, no knowledge of the real world, and only saw the pain of Pokémon used in battles. All of this was carefully planned, so that he would grow up believing that he was doing good, when in fact he was being used. Throughout the anime, especially when he starts to meet Ash and his friends, Maine begins to question everything he believed. He sees healthy relationships between humans and Pokémon, true bonds, and realizes that he has been deceived his entire life. His trajectory is dark because it shows that not all antagonists are malicious. Sometimes they are just someone who has been broken inside. It is a direct critique of ideological manipulation, the distortion of truth, and the use of innocent people as instruments of power. In the end, Nin seeks his own redemption, trying to understand who he really is, far from the voice of Ghetsis and the lies he was forced to believe. The childhood of James, a member of Team Rocket, is told with a comical tone in the anime, but when we look closely, what lies behind it is a deeply dark and sad story. James was born into an extremely wealthy and traditional family. From an early age, he was surrounded by luxury, but also by pressure, strict rules, and the absence of true affection. His parents wanted him to follow a predetermined path, with no room for his own desires. The most striking moment of this past is when he is forced into an engagement with a girl named Jezebel, or Jezebel, depending on the version. A controlling, cruel, and obsessive young woman who had instilled fear in James since childhood. Unable to bear the idea of spending the rest of his life tied to a person who terrified him, and suffocated by an environment where he had no voice, James simply runs away. As a child, he abandons everything: fortune, comfort, family. He ends up living on the streets, getting by as best he can, and eventually joins Team Rocket. Not out of malice, but because he finally found a place where, in a way, he can be who he is. Although the story is told with humor, the subtext is much more serious. James was an emotionally neglected child, forced to mature early and deprived of his freedom. His escape was not out of rebellion, but out of desperation. He chose a life of hardship over one of oppression. This contrast between the character's comedy and the drama of his past makes James much more complex than he seems. Behind his exaggerated and comical manner, there is someone who carries a history of pain, repression, and the search for acceptance. The story of Jessie, from Team Rocket, is one of the most tragic and little talked about in the Pokémon anime. Despite the comedic tone with which she is usually portrayed, her past is marked by abandonment, poverty, and loneliness. From a very young age, Jessie lived in extreme hardship. Her father was never mentioned, and she was raised solely by her mother, Miyamoto, a Team Rocket agent, who disappeared during a mission to find the Pokémon Mew. There are indications, especially in extra material from the Pokémon universe, that Miyamoto may have died, or disappeared in the midst of the research that would later result in the creation of Mewtwo. Without her mother, Jessie ended up alone, and without support. She tried to enter a Pokémon coordination school, but was rejected because she had no money or status. In one episode, she says that she lived in places so cold that her only option was to eat snow to avoid starvation. She also tried to be a Nurse Joy, but failed because she was not a Chansey, showing how lost she was, trying to fit in anywhere. All of these experiences shaped her strong, proud, and often exaggerated personality. Deep down, Jessie is someone who always wanted to have a better life, to be recognized, to be admired, but who was constantly pushed to the margins. Her joining Team Rocket, like James and Meowth, was not just because of villainy, but because of a lack of options. There, she found a kind of family, albeit dysfunctional, where she finally felt like she belonged. Jessie's story is dark because it shows what happens when a child grows up without love, support, or stability. She is a character driven by frustration, insecurity, and a desperate desire to prove her worth, which makes her much more human than villainous.